The first one is the right to equality before the law. The right to equality before the law has been advocated by Nelson Mandela. Former South African President Nelson Mandela, one of the most recognizable human rights symbols of the 20th century, is a man whose dedication to the liberties of his people inspires human rights advocates throughout the world. Nelson Mandela dedicated his life for fighting for equality and ultimately helped topple South Africa's racist system of apartheid. Nelson Mandela once said, "Our march to freedom is irreversible. We must not allow fear to stand in our way." After 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela was freed in 1990 and negotiated with State President Frederick William de Klerk the end of apartheid in South Africa, bringing peace to a racially divided country and leading the fight for human rights around the world. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. In its proper meaning, equality before the law means the right to participate in the making of the laws by which is governed, a constitution which guarantees democratic rights to all sections of the population, the right to approach the court for protection or relief in the case of the violation of rights guaranteed in the constitution, and the right to take part in the administration of justice as judges, magistrates, attorneys general, law advisors, and similar positions.
Next is the Champions of Human Rights, Nelson Mandela from 1918 to 2013. Nelson Mandela is one of the most recognizable human rights symbols of the 20th century, which is a man whose dedication to the liberties of his people inspires human rights advocates throughout the world. Born in Transkei, South Africa, Mandela was the son of a tribal chief and educated himself with a university degree and law degree. He joined the African National Congress (ANC) and actively worked in 1944 to abolish the apartheid policies of the ruling National Party. Sentenced to life imprisonment, Mandela became a powerful symbol of resistance for the rising anti-apartheid movement, repeatedly refusing to compromise his political position to obtain his freedom. Finally, released in February 1990, he intensified the battle against oppression to attain the goals he and others had set out to accomplish almost 4 decades earlier.
The second one is the right to have education.
Mandela's talk and pronouncement on education are divided in two major emphases. First, education is a view as a practical means to economic development. Second, education as a means to social justice, human rights and democracy. Mandela also taught that education is serving to foster social justice, interracial equality, human rights and a deepening of democracy has faded from official educational policy discourse. Nelson Mandela ever quoted that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. He also quoted that no country can really develop unless its citizens are educated. Mandela has taken a few actions that relate to the education. First, Mandela confronting the dominant racializing discourse of the apartheid era. He strongly opposed educational segregation on racial grounds. He also stressing the importance of education in giving pupils high sense of moral and ethical values and preparing them for a full and responsible citizenship in a democratic society. Third, Mandela held that the function of education is to serve the well-being of the nation and people's background, and he pragmatically saw two primary channels by which education would promote this goal.
The third one is a right to life. Nelson Mandela addressed crowd at the Port Elizabeth rally on 1st April 1990. Since there is no word on access to medical care in the South African Constitution, even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights already exists. The document declares that everyone has the right to healthcare service, including reproductive healthcare, and that the state must take appropriate legislative and other steps within its available resource to achieve the progressive fulfillment of both of these rights. Thus, Mandela, a trained lawyer and constitutional scholar, guided South Africa toward a wider understanding of human rights. When his country's constitution was adopted in 1996, he said, "The new constitution obligates us to work to enhance the people's quality of life." In this context, the collective consensus agrees that there is no other reason for government to exist than to alleviate centuries of indescribable suffering by working to eradicate poverty, illiteracy, homelessness, and disease. It also obligates us to support the growth of autonomous civil society structures. Mandela embraced the great vision of the 20th century idealists regarding who understood an obligation to resolve the injustice that bred terror, hate, and totalitarianism at the end of the World War II. Everyone has the right to a standard of living sufficient for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothes, accommodation, medical care, and appropriate social service, as well as the right to protection in the event of unemployment, illness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other loss of subsistence in circumstances beyond his control, according to the declaration. Nelson Mandela Action. In the 50th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1998, Nelson Mandela addressed the UN General Assembly. Said Mandela, who had moved from prisoner to president of South Africa in the previous decade, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights served as vindication of the righteousness of our cause for those who had to fight for their emancipation, such as ourselves who had to liberate ourselves from the criminal apartheid regime with your support. At the same time, it was a challenge to us that once we had our rights, we should devote it to putting the declaration's perspective into practice. Even Nelson Mandela voiced that human rights are denied every day to hundreds of people due to poverty and lack of basic necessities, as well as bad environment. This clearly proved that human rights do not achieve the vision in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Indirectly, it proved that wealth and poverty are the main characteristic of the gap for every human characteristic. Looking for the future, Mandela concluded the challenge posed by the next 50 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the next century, whose character is it must help to fashion, consists in whether humanity, and especially those who will occupy position of leadership, will have the courage to ensure that at last we'll build a human world consistent with the provisions of that historic declaration and other human rights instruments that have been adopted since 1948. Hence, Nelson Mandela action towards this issue is by making opposition to the existence of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights but not applicable. The President of South Africa was explicit in his criticism of leaders who failed by acts of commission and omission to address civil and economic justice.